The intercom shrieked, spitting back my fury into the sterile air. Outside the HOA gate, I hammered on the unresponsive keypad, a useless gesture of desperation. Inside, 100 feet and a locked gate away, my father was dying. Paramedics, their faces grim, joined the frantic pounding. And behind the fence, she stood. Karen, HOA president, arms crossed, a glacial expression on her face. Her words, delivered with chilling precision, echoed in my ears. Policy is policy. 3 days later, my father was dead. 3 months after that, the lawsuits descended like vengeful angels, and Karen, the architect of her iron-fisted regime, lost everything. This is the story of how HOA Karen killed my father and how I systematically dismantled her empire, one meticulously researched violation at a time. It began on a Tuesday, a day already tainted by the bureaucratic labyrinth of the DMV. Then my dad called, his voice, usually a booming testament to his stubborn Marine spirit, slurred and confused. He couldn't feel his right side, his vision blurred. Panic seized me. I slammed down the phone, dialed 911, and roared out of the parking lot, tires screaming against the asphalt. My dad lived in a gated community, a meticulously manicured prison ruled by a homeowners association that considered themselves the guardians of suburban sanctity. You couldn't breathe without filing a noise complaint in triplicate. And they had rules. Rigid, inflexible, life-threatening rules. The ambulance was already waiting at the gate when I arrived, sirens silenced, lights flashing a silent, desperate plea. 2 EMTs, their faces etched with frustration, were attacking the keypad, their efforts as futile as pleading with a brick wall. I exploded from my car, heart hammering against my ribs, and sprinted towards them. Every second was a stolen breath. I slammed the call button on the intercom. It rang, once, twice, then the camera flickered to life. And there she was, Karen. A monstrous hybrid of wine mom and Bond villain, her blouse starched to within an inch of its life, her hair lacquered into an impenetrable fortress, her face a mask of disdain, as if she'd just been subjected to the most offensive odor imaginable. She looked directly at me, directly at the paramedics, and uttered the words that would haunt my nightmares. This vehicle is not registered with the community. Emergency or not, it must go through the proper channels. I wish I could say she was simply ignorant, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. But she knew. She knew. I screamed into the speaker, my voice raw with desperation, that my father was having a stroke, that every minute counted, that we would lose him. She consulted her clipboard, yes, a clipboard, and declared, "Residents are responsible for ensuring their guests and services are pre-approved." Then, with the casual cruelty of a seasoned executioner, she hung up. 13 minutes. 13 agonizing, rage-fueled, gut-wrenching minutes. Finally, another board member, a flicker of humanity still burning in their soul, manually overrode the gate. The ambulance surged forward and I followed, tearing into my father's house like a man possessed, trying to claw back time with my bare hands. He was on the floor, one arm twitching uncontrollably, the other limp and lifeless, his eyes half open, unfocused. The EMTs worked feverishly, but it was too late. The stroke had spread, an insidious tide washing away his life. He never woke up. 2 days later, I signed the papers to turn off life support. On the 3rd, he was gone. I didn't cry at first. I think I was too consumed by a cold, incandescent rage. At the funeral, Karen, in a grotesque parody of compassion, sent flowers. Sent flowers meaning she shoved a wreath onto our porch with a folded violation notice nestled inside. Apparently, our grass had grown half an inch too high in the 2 days I'd spent vigil at my dying father's bedside. I stared at that notice, and something within me snapped. That moment when grief transforms into calculated, unwavering purpose. That was me. HOAs are bullies in pleated khakis, wielding their rule books like weapons. They thrive on the complacency of others, bending regulations while assuming no one will fight back. Karen, however, had underestimated me. I wasn't just a grieving son. I was an estate planner with a minor in property law and a burning thirst for justice. I started digging. Not metaphorically, literally. I unearthed their charter, their bylaws, even the state regulations they were supposed to adhere to. And what I discovered was a treasure trove of malfeasance. The gate? Installed illegally, no emergency override system, non-compliant with local ordinances. Every second it remained locked during an emergency constituted a liability. But screaming into the void wouldn't suffice. I needed evidence. I needed receipts. So I started talking to the neighbors, casual conversations while walking my father's dog, a few, "Hey, did you hear about HOA?" inquiries. What I unearthed was a gold mine of grievances. A neighbor's dog had perished in a fire last year because the fire truck couldn't breach the gate. Another woman had suffered a miscarriage, only to be denied an Uber because it wasn't on the approved guest list. Someone else claimed Karen fined them $100 every time their daughter parked her car facing the wrong direction. The litany of injustices was endless. This wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was the construction of an airtight case. But just when I thought I held the upper hand, Karen struck again. A certified letter arrived, a formal citation for emotional disruption of community harmony, for daring to beg emergency services to save my father's life. I reread the letter, disbelief warring with fury. Then I laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. Karen wasn't just clueless. She was dangerous, reckless, and now, officially, I had the paper trail to prove it. 2 days later, I filed the first complaint with the city. Not the lawsuit, that was yet to come. This was a subtle jab, a request for a public review of their gate installation permit. Spoiler alert, there wasn't one. Then came the fire marshal's report, followed by the accessibility complaint. I didn't throw one grand theatrical punch. I unleashed 1,000 paper cuts, each small, each legal, each meticulously planned. Just when I thought I had established a rhythm, a knock echoed on my door. A man in a suit, his smile as slick as his sunglasses, even indoors, extended a folder. "You've been served." Karen was suing me for harassment, for defamation, for intentional disruption of neighborhood tranquility. And the most exquisite part? She had filed it under the HOA's name, dragging the entire board into the legal quagmire. Standing on my porch, holding that folder, I realized Karen had made her gravest error. She had made it personal. Making it personal with someone like me was a strategic blunder of epic proportions. Because I didn't just get angry, I became a surgeon of injustice. Her lawsuit was a laughably flimsy patchwork of buzzwords and HOA jargon, a badly written soap opera script. She claimed I was undermining public trust, creating emotional unrest, and weaponizing grief for personal gain. Yet nowhere in that mountain of legal fluff was any acknowledgement that her gate had delayed medical care and contributed to a man's death. According to her, the real crime was my attitude, my audacity to question her authority. So I did what any responsible adult with a vendetta and a caffeine addiction would do. I lawyered up. Denise, my attorney, was a calm, sharp-witted woman who had navigated the treacherous waters of HOA disputes more times than she could count. When I handed her the lawsuit, she erupted in laughter, pausing only to gasp for air. "Oh, she's in for it," she declared, flipping through the pages like they were coupons. We filed a motion to dismiss, but we didn't stop there. Denise countered with a lawsuit of our own. Wrongful death, negligence, obstruction, emotional distress, and the pièce de résistance, a public accountability suit, dragging both Karen and the HOA into the harsh glare of the spotlight. The moment the case became public, the landscape shifted. A local news station picked up the story. HOA refuses emergency access, resident dies, the anchor intoned, my father's name echoing in the silence. People started reaching out. Strangers, former HOA board members from other communities, even a retired firefighter who had experienced the same gate-related delays. Everyone had a story, and more importantly, everyone hated their HOA. I went from grieving son to reluctant hero in the niche category of suburban warfare. I hadn't asked for it, but I was damn well going to use it. Of course, Karen didn't handle the attention well. Her public statement was a masterpiece of passive aggression. While our community mourns the unfortunate circumstances, she intoned, we must also remember the importance of order, security, and respect for procedures designed to protect us all. She might as well have called my father's death an inconvenient scheduling conflict. Her smugness fueled the fire. The comments section exploded. People were outraged, some demanding to know how an HOA could wield such power over life and death, others sharing their own horror stories. Gates locked during fires, paramedics stalled during heart attacks, families penalized for hosting birthday parties with unregistered guests. Karen had unintentionally opened Pandora's box. Within 2 weeks, the HOA was drowning in scrutiny. The city launched an investigation into their gate system. A fire marshal showed up unannounced and discovered their so-called emergency override box had been non-functional for over a year. Strike one. The ADA compliance team followed, revealing multiple violations concerning access for elderly and disabled residents. Strike two. And then came the insurance audit, the true knockout punch. Their liability insurance had lapsed 6 months earlier due to an unpaid renewal invoice that Karen had conveniently ignored. Strike three. The HOA wasn't just in trouble, it was bleeding out, vulnerable. But Karen, oblivious to the impending doom, continued to strut around like an invincible demigod, handing out citations, calling board meetings, completely detached from the legal cliff she was teetering on. At one particularly surreal meeting, she accused me of orchestrating a coordinated smear campaign against her leadership, as if I possessed the time, energy, or inclination to mastermind a political coup against the queen of the flower bed. I recorded everything. Every word, every interaction, every ridiculous piece of paper shoved under my door. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. I had learned that in the world of HOAs, documentation was ammunition. Meanwhile, Denise worked tirelessly. She subpoenaed the HOA's financial records, and what we discovered was enlightening. Karen had been reimbursing herself for community representation expenses. Thousands of dollars in personal spa visits, luxury meals, boutique hotel stays, all disguised under vague labels like external relations or professional morale boosting. In other words, she was stealing. We handed the file to the city attorney's office and watched the wheels of justice begin to turn. But the moment that truly solidified the shift in power, the day I walked past Karen's house and saw a city inspector stapling a bright red violation notice to her front door, wasn't just poetic, it was downright cinematic. Her own rules twisted against her. The woman who had fined me for overgrown grass now faced a citation for an unpermitted water feature and misreported landscaping expenses. Apparently, the koi pond she installed last spring lacked the necessary permits. You couldn't invent this level of irony, and yet she still refused to back down. When board members started resigning, she held a press conference on the community lawn. I kid you not. She stood before a hand-painted banner that declared, "Leadership under fire," claiming she was being targeted because she was a strong woman who enforced order in a world of chaos. Half the residents laughed, the other half groaned. No one cheered. It was over. She just didn't realize it yet. Then, out of the blue, I received a call from a woman named Linda. Soft voice, nervous tone. She said she had served on the HOA board until last year and asked if we could meet. We sat in a coffee shop while she recounted the real story. Karen had threatened board members with lawsuits if they didn't align with her decisions. She had allegedly forged signatures on internal votes. And worst of all, there had been previous emergency gate failures that were covered up by editing the entry logs. She handed me a flash drive, confessing she could no longer live with the guilt. I took that flash drive home, plugged it in, and saw everything. Emails, meeting transcripts, internal memos, all pointing to deliberate negligence, cover-ups, and manipulation of the HOA's own systems. I had proof that my father wasn't the first, just the last. That changed everything. This wasn't just a civil case anymore. It was criminal negligence. Staring at my laptop screen, flipping through each incriminating document, I realized what had to come next. The lawsuit was just the opening salvo. The real war was about to begin, and Karen was going to wish she had simply opened the damn gate. Karen didn't see it coming. She was too preoccupied with giving interviews to local lifestyle blogs and issuing defensive HOA newsletters, portraying herself as a victim of internet mobs and misinformation. She continued to pretend the fire wasn't already consuming her empire, even as her carefully curated kingdom began to crumble from within. But when the subpoenas started arriving, landing in mailboxes like flaming arrows, things grew quiet. Real quiet. 3 board members resigned in the same week. One left a typed resignation letter taped to the clubhouse door that simply read, "I didn't sign up for this." No signature, just the sentence. That was the tone now. Panic, laced with cowardice. The city attorney didn't waste time. They cross-referenced the files from the flash drive with official community reports, and the discrepancies were so glaring it was laughable. The entry logs from the gate had been scrubbed clean on multiple occasions. Entire days were missing, days when residents had complained about ambulance delays or service workers being denied access. There was even one case where a man's oxygen tank delivery was turned away at the gate because the driver wasn't pre-approved. That man had to be hospitalized later that night. Karen had buried it, just like she buried everything else that didn't conform to her narrative of perfect, peaceful community standards. Denise filed an amendment to our lawsuit. It now included criminal negligence and fraud. Karen was being sued personally, not just in her capacity as HOA president. That's when the gears truly began to grind. Her house, her car, her accounts, they were all suddenly within reach. And her lawyer, some budget mall attorney with a commercial that aired between soap opera reruns, looked like he practiced out of the back of a vape shop. I almost felt bad for him, until I remembered he was defending someone who had weaponized a gate against a dying man. Karen's composure cracked in stages. First, she stopped attending board meetings in person. Then, she started sending out memos from a private email address, which we immediately subpoenaed. When her own neighbors began testifying against her, she snapped, going full scorched earth, accusing people of conspiring, of being brainwashed by internet hysteria, and, my personal favorite, of being anti-comm community, whatever that meant. Meanwhile, Denise and I simply continued to stack the deck. More statements, more affidavits, more expert witnesses. An emergency responder from another district even volunteered to testify that he had flagged this exact HOA years ago for dangerous gate delays and had been politely ignored. That phrase became something of a rallying cry for us, politely ignored. That's what Karen did best, until people stopped being polite. When the deposition finally arrived, Karen was a shell of her former self. No clipboard, no pearls, just a trembling hand and a perpetually defensive posture. She kept glancing at her lawyer like he was going to hurl himself across the table to save her every time she was cornered. But Denise didn't even raise her voice. She calmly, methodically dismantled her, question by question, email by email. Karen attempted to evade, to deflect, to blame others, to feign memory loss. But the flash drive didn't lie. There was an entire thread where she discussed delaying emergency services to protect the HOA from future liabilities. Imagine believing that letting someone die was a valid strategy to protect your organization. After the deposition, the city revoked the HOA's operational license. That's not a common occurrence, but in this instance, the HOA was so riddled with corruption, mismanagement, and outright cruelty that the city decided to intervene and place the entire community under temporary municipal management. Overnight, Karen lost every vestige of authority she had clung to. Her gate dismantled. Her parking violation crusade canceled. Her power gone. And adding insult to injury, the new city-appointed manager was the same guy Karen had once fined for leaving his trash cans out past 6 p.m. The irony was so palpable you could bottle it. Of course, the legal fallout was only beginning. The civil case proceeded with enough momentum to make her sweat blood. Multiple plaintiffs joined in. Families, elderly residents, people she had hurt, fined, threatened, or ignored. The case file resembled a phone book by the end. While Karen desperately sought a quiet settlement, Denise refused. We weren't going to let this end with a sealed agreement and a slap on the wrist. People had suffered. Some had been permanently scarred. My dad had died. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about accountability. And Karen, for the first time in her miserable reign, couldn't wriggle her way out of it. At one point, Karen tried to sell her house to avoid the court-ordered lien. But the moment the listing went live, the comments section erupted. "Is this the house where that HOA psycho lived? Does the gate still murder people, or is that extra?" The real estate agent quit after 4 days. Public opinion had transformed her into a pariah. She wasn't just Karen anymore. She was that Karen, the cautionary tale, the meme, the story people told at backyard barbecues to warn others about the dangers of unchecked HOA power. The trial date was set for late spring, but Karen's side blinked first. Her lawyer proposed a settlement, massive damages, full admission of fault, public apology. We considered it. Denise wanted to push for more, but I knew what I wanted. Not just money, not just her house. I wanted something permanent, so I negotiated one last condition. Karen would be legally banned from holding any position in any HOA, community board, or property management group for the rest of her life. Lifetime disqualification. She could plant flowers in her own backyard, sure, but she would never be allowed near a clipboard again. When the judge read the terms aloud, she looked like someone had stolen her spine. She nodded, barely, like a child being forced to apologize in front of the class. And when it was all over, I walked past her without a word. I didn't need to say anything. She knew. Afterward, I went home and checked the mailbox. Inside was a final letter from the dissolved HOA. It was an old one, delayed in delivery, postmarked before everything imploded. Another citation. This one for excessive wind chimes. I laughed out loud. It was so perfectly ridiculous, so on brand for her reign of petty tyranny, that I framed it. But just when I thought the story had reached its conclusion, that everything was settled, I received another call from Linda. Her voice was different this time, urgent. She said she had something else, something bigger. A second flash drive, one Karen had concealed, containing information not just about our community, but about several others she had been involved with years before. Patterns, deals, secret funds, and potentially more death. That's when I realized it wasn't over. Not even close. Karen might have lost her gate, her title, her money, but the machine she had built, this insidious system of quiet abuse disguised as community order, might still be alive in other places. And if it was, then I had a new mission. Because I wasn't just going to burn down the gate, I was going to tear down the whole damn system. I didn't think revenge would feel like this. I imagined it would be louder, more dramatic, like a standing ovation or a slow clap at the end of a courtroom drama. But when the final ruling came in, when the last signature dried on the settlement papers and Karen's name was officially erased from everything, it was quiet. No fireworks, no victory parade, just a long, deep exhale and the heavy realization that the thing I had been holding on to for months, anger, grief, drive, had finally landed somewhere. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free and tired. But mostly free. The HOA was dead, gone, legally dissolved, its assets seized, its board dismantled. The city had assumed management of the community, implementing a rotating oversight committee and a hotline for emergencies. The gate was physically removed, dismantled piece by piece over the course of a single morning while residents watched from their porches, sipping coffee like they were witnessing justice unfold in real time. One neighbor even brought lawn chairs. Another passed out cupcakes. It was the most cheerful demolition I had ever seen. The keypad that had once denied entry to paramedics now lay in a heap of broken circuits and bent metal. Someone spray-painted "Access Denied, huh?" on it before it was tossed into the back of a municipal truck. Karen was nowhere to be seen during the demolition. She had moved out a week earlier, slinking away in the dead of night with what little dignity remained. Her house had been sold at a loss, her bank accounts emptied by court-ordered damages. I later heard she had ended up in a gated apartment complex in another part of the state. The irony would have been delectable if it wasn't so deeply tragic. She was living in someone else's version of her old power. This time, she was just another resident, no clipboard, no control, just a gate she couldn't command, waiting to deny her access. Like poetic justice on a timer. I didn't follow up with her. I didn't need to. That chapter was closed and I had other things to focus on. Because here's the thing about enduring hell and emerging on the other side, you start noticing who else is still trapped there. The stories didn't stop after the lawsuit. They kept coming. Emails, letters, anonymous tips, other neighborhoods, other HOAs, other Karens, different names, same game. I wasn't surprised anymore, just fueled. So I started something new, a foundation in my father's name, the Emergency Access Initiative. Our mission was simple: no more locked gates standing between first responders and the people who desperately needed them. We started small, with education campaigns, community talks, and interviews with local news outlets. Then we moved into advocacy, working with state representatives to pass legislation mandating emergency override systems in all gated communities. That one was personal. I stood before a committee and recounted word for word the events that had led to my father's death. No sugarcoating, no dramatics, just the stark, brutal truth. He died because a keypad didn't recognize an ambulance. That was enough to propel the bill through. And it wasn't just our state that took notice. Other states began drafting their own versions. Momentum was a beautiful thing. I stayed in the house for a while after everything ended, not because I loved it, but because it was his. My father had built that place himself, brick by brick, every corner imbued with his stubborn pride. I couldn't bring myself to sell it yet. It was quiet now, devoid of the constant threat of fines or HOA goons lurking with cameras and clipboards. The neighborhood changed too. People smiled more, talked more, laughed without glancing over their shoulders. It was as if a collective exhale had swept through the community. We were finally permitted to be neighbors again, instead of suspects in someone else's control fantasy. The front yard became a small memorial garden, understated and dignified, a bench, a plaque bearing my father's name, and a space for contemplation. Someone left flowers every week. I never discovered who. Perhaps one of the neighbors he used to help fix sprinklers for, or simply someone who remembered what had happened. Either way, it served as a constant reminder that people don't forget, especially when something shatters the illusion of safety. That gate was supposed to keep danger out, but it had locked it in. And now, people were starting to ask the right questions. I didn't expect the second flash drive to haunt me as deeply as it did. I had already won, hadn't I? Karen was gone. The HOA was dead. The laws were changing. But Linda had been right. What she had given me wasn't just supplementary evidence. It was a blueprint of a much larger problem. Other HOAs Karen had consulted for, other communities she had influenced. Patterns of power abuse? Falsified records. One document listed a string of emergency reroutes that had caused significant delays. One entry culminated in death, a child. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stop at just our neighborhood. So, I didn't. I expanded the foundation's reach. I collaborated with journalists to expose systemic flaws in private community management. I even started a podcast, of all things, interviewing victims of HOA abuse. It gained traction faster than I anticipated. People needed to vent. They needed to know they weren't crazy, that the absurdity they were experiencing wasn't unique, that there were others fighting back. And slowly, like a crack spreading across glass, the image of the all-powerful HOA began to splinter. But even with all of that, some nights I would still wake up and remember the incessant beeping of that keypad, the cold, unforgiving metal of the intercom box, Karen's malevolent face on the camera screen, my voice cracking with desperation, my dad's voice echoing in my memory. Grief isn't something you erase with a court case or a settlement check. It lingers. It sharpens you. It sits quietly in your chest like a stone you learn to carry. But the weight becomes lighter when you know it wasn't for nothing, that someone else's father might live because mine didn't, that a gate will swing open next time instead of holding firm. The last time I visited the old gate site, it was just open space. The posts were gone, the keypad hole filled in. Someone had planted flowers where the control box used to be. Bright, unapologetic marigolds. My dad hated flowers, calling them fancy weeds with an ego. But I think he would have appreciated these, not for what they were, but for what they represented. That something once cold and indifferent had been replaced with something alive. As I stood there, hands in my pockets, a kid biked past me and waved. No gate to stop him, no clipboard to track him, just a kid, free to come and go as he pleased. And that's when it really struck me. This wasn't just a story about revenge. It was about freedom, about refusing to let fear masquerade as order, about demolishing the illusion of control when it becomes a cage, and about ensuring that no one ever dies behind a keypad again. I turned around and walked back to my car, the wind at my back, the sun breaking through the clouds. And just before I closed the door, I glanced over my shoulder one last time and whispered, "Too quiet for anyone but me to hear, but loud enough for the memory to catch it. Too late for flowers, but at least nobody has to die to get in anymore."